So from talking to hundreds of people who are on this Quran journey, I've learned that most people actually either stop or give up on their Quran journey just because they feel like they're going too slow. But alhamdulillah, now that I've been memorizing consistently for like more than a year now, and I've reached 20 hizb, I kind of like learned some techniques that might allow you to memorize faster than you are right now. You see, last year when I was early on in my memorization, I was in college and I was also balancing other things. And then before you knew it, the whole day ended and I didn't manage to memorize anything. And to be honest, even now that happens occasionally where the days start going by like really fast. And at the end of the week, you realize like I didn't even memorize anything. And from that point on, I started introducing something where it's kind of like a Quran sprint. Essentially, I only try to do this when I realize I haven't memorized or made any progress in my hifz for a while. I try to kind of just like add on a lot to my memorization and in a short amount of time to kind of make up for what I didn't do in the past. You see, you might be hearing this and might think this is all good, but I actually don't really recommend this because when you memorize something fast, it also tends to slip away from your memory pretty fast. So honestly, the more and more I've been like putting days into memorizing, the more I've learned it's actually better to memorize slow because when you're going fast, the chances are that you're just going to start skipping through the Quran and not even really repeating the certain ayah or verses as much. And then before you know it, it's going to be really watery in your memory. And then over just like a few days, it'll totally wipe out of your memory. But I'm not going to lie to you, there's also points in your memorization journey where you might kind of lose motivation because you see how slow you're going. This might be beneficial to introduce kind of like a sprint like this where you really go intense in memorizing and it kind of gives you that motivational boost to keep going onto this journey. Because this actually happened to me when I was around the 27th juz of the Quran. I specifically found these surahs to be actually pretty hard to memorize and I was barely making any progress whatsoever. So what I told myself is I'm going to finish this juz really quickly, inshallah, using this kind of method I'm about to tell you right now. But essentially what happened is that within just like a week or a few weeks, I started noticing I was making tons of mistakes when I revisited that juz to revise. So now that you know that this actually isn't always the move, that memorizing fast isn't actually always beneficial for you, we can actually get into the tips. And the first one I'll tell you is that go through the first few pages that you're memorizing pretty fast. Like don't actually repeat them as much as you think you need to. The reason for this is because when most people finish a surah, they actually tend to repeat it multiple times before moving on to the next one. And in general, even if they didn't complete it, they'll revise those first few pages more than they tend to do the last few pages. So that technically means you can memorize the first few pages and only have them weak in memory because you can kind of rely on yourself that you're going to go back and strengthen them when you actually finish that particular surah. So essentially, most of the time when I'm actually like memorizing for strength, I would repeat the page or even repeat the ayahs like 30 times before moving on to the next one. Whereas this particular method, I'll only do it like 15 times for the first page because I know later on in the memorization, I'm going to keep revising those first few pages more than I would the last few pages. Another thing that I did was while I was going to class, while I was working, whatever I was doing, I would have the page I was going to memorize later on that day repeating in my ear throughout the day. And essentially when I actually came to memorize later in the day, I already memorized like either like a quarter of the page or honestly half the page just from listening. And it would only take me like 30 minutes to actually memorize that page. And then I would just repeat it a few times to like keep it in my memory and then move on to the next page. Essentially, you have to accept the fact that you're really memorizing just for like a basic level of memory and then moving on rather than when you're actually memorizing normally, you're actually trying to like keep it in your mind for like a while. And on top of just listening to that particular page I was going to memorize later in the day, another thing that really helps that I don't really hear a lot of people talk about is that before you sleep, if you actually just read the page you're going to memorize the next day when you come to memorize it, it feels like you already memorized a portion of it or that you kind of warmed it up to the point where it kind of does the same type of benefit that you get from listening, where when you actually come to memorize it, it's way faster. You'd be surprised, instead of using those last like 20, 30 minutes on your phone before you sleep to watch like YouTube or to do whatever, it's way better if you actually just kind of warm up what you're going to memorize the next day. You'll find that it helps you a lot in terms of like your memorizing efficiency. So essentially all these tactics really just come down to warming up what you're about to memorize. And then also when you do come to memorize, memorizing it to kind of a basic level, because at the end, that's when you're going to like kind of really focus on revising it and strengthening it into your memory. A lot of people have experienced that feeling where maybe there was a particular surah that was just played in your house, like when you were a kid or something like that, or they just like to listen to. And then if you ever actually come to like when you visibly try to memorize that page, you tend to do it like 4 times, 5 times as fast. So if you take that tactic and kind of extrapolate it to just doing it throughout the Quran, you'll tend to find that like your progress in general across all different surahs is way faster. And one of the things that I wish someone told me earlier was that one of the best ways to get faster at memorizing is to stay memorizing for a longer amount of time. When I just started memorizing Quran, it took me so long to memorize a page. And it's just because you're not familiar with the patterns, you're not familiar with the mutashabihat that appear often in the Quran. You're not even familiar with reading Arabic maybe. But then when you actually put in the months, you put in like a year, 2 years, something like that, you start to memorize at like triple the speed because there's so many things that are happening while you're memorizing that you don't actually feel, but that you're improving upon. Like your brain is getting used to memorizing. You're getting better with like reading the Arabic language, pronunciation, getting used to the patterns of the Quran. All this stuff kind of compounds until like eventually months into your memorization, you find yourself like what used to take you hours to memorize now only takes you maybe half an hour. So if you're someone who's just starting, this should be huge motivation because there's people who've been memorizing for years and they do not find it nearly as difficult as you might right now. It's kind of a boring answer, but a lot of it does kind of just come down to when you put the time into it a lot, you get way better at the skill. And then when you get better at the skill, you also have the desire to want to memorize more. So it's kind of just this cycle that you need to build, inshallah. But really, those are some of the biggest realizations that have helped me. But I do want to reiterate that the whole purpose of why we're memorizing isn't really to go fast. It's to actually contemplate like what you're memorizing is to do it for yourself. So don't kind of get caught up too much, because this happened to me where you get caught up so much in the pages you're memorizing and you just want to keep making progress just to say, oh, I'm at this portion of the Quran. But in reality, you don't even have it like memorized that strong to begin with. There's honestly probably more satisfaction when you can recall any surah, any ayah that you memorized in the past, more than just like, oh, I memorized this amount, but it's super weak memorization. And we all know that the best method if you want to strengthen your memorization is to just revise in front of someone who knows Quran. And inshallah, if you're looking for that, feel free to join our Quran community. The link's in the description. Inshallah, inside where we revise Quran every single weekend. Inshallah, I'll see you inside. Assalamu alaikum.